Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Diana Lindsay. I'm the president of Sunbelt Publications. We publish books about the Southwest, the regional area, cultural histories, natural history, hiking guides. And today we have something special. It's very timely. COVID-19, not a great topic, and I'm sure many of us are tired of it and just want to get back to our normal lives. But this is an interesting subject on isolation and social distancing. And of course, this is something that we are doing and not out of choice, but because we have to be safe. And it has had many consequences. You know, for most people, the isolation, the social distancing, staying at home, not having our normal relationships. We're having relationships through digital Zooms, through masks that we have to wear. And it's difficult. And for some, it's probably a little depressing. It's a little stressing. There may be a few out there who actually, believe it or not, might actually like the isolation and might enjoy the separation simply because they're inclined to maybe like isolation, like to be alone, like to be able to study, don't like to have too many relationships. But for most of us, it's a very stressing period. So why do I mention this? I mention this because there was a family 80 years ago in Anza-Borrego State Park who homesteaded after the Depression because they chose isolation and they chose social distancing. This is Marshal South in the Ghost Mountain Chronicles. It was an experiment in primitive living, and it was out of choice that they lived in isolation and social distancing. How did it turn out? Well, for Marshall, who actually welcomed social distancing and wanted the isolation, he was in his own element. He wanted to be alone. He wanted to be able to study nature, to be able to write, to do artwork, to do those things that really captivated his mind and stimulated him. For his wife, Tanya, it was a different story. When she first started out there with him, it was an adventure. In fact, let me kind of show you a picture of what they looked like. This is the couple, Marshall and Tanya South, both writers, very creative folks. And they wanted to have this isolation because for Tanya, it was a way of getting out so she could be closer to God, so that she could pray, she could be with nature. But as time wore on, it really got to her, this isolation. She only saw people maybe twice a year when they went into town, into Julian, to buy supplies. Marshall, on the other hand, was able to go out once a month to buy supplies, to bring things home. But for them, it was a very lonely, quiet life in the outdoors, just with nature. And there were times when actually Tanya had had enough and she wanted to leave. She wanted children too. And so they had children because that kept her there. And they did raise a family. They actually had two boys and a little girl that they raised out there in isolation. They homeschooled them with the Julian School District before the word homeschooling ever happened. So they were totally raised out there in nature. You can see the two boys here playing with walnut ships in a puddle of water. And they actually had a nice home that they built by themselves out in the wilderness. So how did they survive? Well, for Marshall, he was very creative. He was a writer. So he wrote for Desert Magazine every single month. It was kind of like The Survivor. He would write stories of how they were living out there, how they were living off of nature. He wrote books, brought in some money that way. But what he did, he captivated people. They loved reading his stories monthly in Desert Magazine. He captivated those folks who thought it was an ideal way of life. But they never asked Tanya. For Tanya, it was difficult. And when talking to Marshal's son, Ryder, who I interviewed while I worked on the book, the Marshal South book. In fact, I started working on the book almost 40 years ago with my master's thesis at San Diego State on the history of Anza-Borrego State Park. And he said it was a hard life. It was difficult. They were sunburned. It was hot. They were hungry. There were insects. Sometimes they got insect bites. It was not a really pleasant life, but they survived out there. But for Marshall, he was out in nature doing his thing. And for Tanya, as years went by, there were little pauses where she was able to kind of focus her life on her children. As each child came along, that was her focus. But as the children got older, she began to worry, what is this isolation going to do to them? How are they going to be able to relate to each other? She wanted out. She wanted out. She was depressed. It was a very, very difficult life for her. And so that began the whole process of how do you get out of this? Kind of like what's happening in our society right now when we're stuck at home. We're not able to relate to people very well. You might be a partner that you love, but living with them day in and day out, if you've got a small house, you're going to get on each other, and it's going to become difficult. Little things become big things. Little words get angry, and then you get that frustration, and you might end up wanting out. And that is exactly how Tanya was. Incidentally, I just want to kind of show you a picture of what a great artist he was. So that was one of the ways that he did make money. But if you go up to Ghost Mountain today, what you're going to find are just the ruins. And it's an interesting experiment in primitive living on how they did live. But more important than that, it's a story of how two different people, one who actually wanted the isolation, who wanted the social distancing so he could be his creative self, and the other one who endured it, who went up there first as an adventure, but then slowly it began to wear on her and she wanted out. She was a poet. She wrote lots of poetry, but her poetry toward the end was of suffering, of enduring, and what it was like to just kind of hang in there. In fact, one quick poem from Tanya. Be patient, dear, for no things last. Soon shall the present be the past, and what you suffer from today, tomorrow shall be ashes gray. So this is a book that you might want to consider reading just to kind of see how people dealt with isolation and how two different people focused on different things, how they kind of looked at it, and you might find it of interest. What I'd like to do is, if you'd like having this chat session, this is something Sunbelt is considering doing with all our authors so they could tell you a little bit about our books. And we would like your comments about this short session. And if you could take a look at it, this is, please email us, give us your responses on what you thought of having just kind of a quick chat about one of our books. And of course, here is our email address and our Facebook page. If you'd like to have a little bit more information about our books and our events and what we're doing, please ask to join our Facebook page or our newsletter. We would appreciate it. And right now, I'd like to ask you, do you have any questions, quick questions about Marshal South, Tanya South, about Sunbelt? I'd love to be able to answer them, and please let us know what your questions are.
Maria is asking, is her poetry available?
Her poetry is available only through Desert Magazine articles that Marshal South wrote. She actually wrote one poem for every article he wrote, and he wrote for 9 years, every single month. And you can find Desert Magazine online, but better than that, if you want to see Marshal South's, all of his stories and his stories of how they survived out there, then I would highly recommend getting a copy of the Ghost Mountain Chronicles. The Chronicles not only have all of the Desert Magazine articles in it, what they also have is an interview with Ryder South on how it was like growing up on Ghost Mountain in total isolation. And of course, it was very difficult for the children when they came back to actually socialize and become part of a school. They all went to Point Loma schools, elementary school, high school, graduating from there, and slowly adjusted to society. But that isolation, it was very much a part of their early life, and they had to adapt to it. Any other questions?
I think the chat's delayed a little bit, so I'm waiting for some questions to see if we got some more come in. Diana Lindsay says, more of this, please.
Well, we definitely like to do more of this, and you know, we really want to thank you for joining. This is our first Facebook Live, and this has been an interesting experience to see if this really works and if, you know, we can connect with people this way. And we loved being able to do this because normally we do live presentations, but we're attempting to do these Facebook Lives and maybe even some events with PowerPoint slides and our authors actually, just like you would have in a real situation, real presentation. So if you're interested in being able part of our live presentations via online mechanisms, you know, please let us know. Let us know how to contact you, and we will send you out invitations when we're able to do these kinds of talks.
Wait and see if there's any more.
If there's any more questions, I'd love to take them.
Questions? All right.
Otherwise, we will thank you for coming and hope you join us in our next chat at Sunbelt with one of our authors. If you'd like us to do this and continue it, please let us know. Thank you, and thank you for joining us. It's been great.